Dear friends in the Nordics and beyond, welcome to Choosing Green. This is a Nordic one-day climate summit, and we are about to start this day's first module that we try to answer the question, how far have we come? My name is Meri Estrin, and I will be moderating these two first hours of this day's program. 2020 was supposed to be the year of climate ambition. COP26 in Glasgow was supposed, now I need to take this away because I hear too many things in my ear here. COP26 in Glasgow was going to be the most important climate event during this year since, and actually the most important since COP21 in Paris. But then, as we know, came COVID-19 and nothing is like it was supposed to be. Now, when we finally dare hope for a vaccine in a foreseeable future, it's time for us in the Nordics and for everyone else to start planning for the life after pandemic. And when we plan this life and when we plan a restart, we cannot ignore the fact that no matter what measures we decide to take to recover from this current crisis, they cannot undermine the efforts to tackle the long-term crisis of climate change. We are gathered here in Copenhagen and in Stockholm, Helsinki, Oslo, and Reykjavik today to discuss what kind of issues and messages the Nordics should bring to COP26, which we hope will be arranged in Glasgow next year. The countries in the Nordics have made their position clear. In January last year, the prime ministers in a meeting in Helsinki declared that the aim of the Nordics is to become carbon neutral and to demonstrate leadership in the fight against global warming. In August last year, the prime ministers decided on a new vision for a region. According to the vision, the Nordic countries are going to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world. So we have challenged ourselves with very ambitious goals. A couple of weeks ago, the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, formulated his challenge for the Nordics. The world needs your leadership more than ever, he said. And he urged the Nordics to serve as a global model for green, inclusive, and sustainable recovery. And the question is, are we ready for that? Today, as I told you, we will have speakers from the Nordic countries. So now let's take a quick tour so that you know where we are going to be and what it will look like today. So let's start here in Copenhagen. We can wave to everyone. Please take a wave. And now our stage is in Helsinki. Are you there, Helsinki? And Oslo. A lone person in Oslo. Reykjavik. And Stockholm. And a lone person in Stockholm as well. And now let's start with today's first theme. We start by inviting our first keynote speaker, who is Professor of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Reykjavik in Iceland. She is a heavyweight climate actor. Brynhildur Davidsdottir, she is joining us from our stage in Reykjavik. Brynhildur, the stage is yours.
Thank you. The Paris Agreement's central aim is to keep increases in global temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to keep temperature increases as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. But for this to become reality, carbon neutrality needs to be reached as close to 2050 as possible. To this end, several parties to the Paris Agreement have already pledged to reach carbon neutrality. For example, the EU, which aims to reach neutrality by 2050, and now China, which aims to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. But the question we're dealing with here today is, are the Nordics climate frontrunners? And in my mind, a climate frontrunner status has three specific elements. First of all, a nation must have ambitious targets. Second, a nation has to have a plan to actively work towards these targets and visibly be making progress. Third, it matters as well how a nation intends to reach these targets. What are the means? What are the instruments that are going to be used to get there? For example, are nations emphasizing domestic action, and are they ensuring that a transition to a low carbon economy is a just transition? So what I want to do now is to look at these three elements. So first, the targets. It is clear, as already has been stated, that the Nordic countries have ambitious climate targets. They're all signatories to the Paris Agreement and have stated that they will participate in the EU goal of reaching 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And now the EU has indicated that this collective commitment will increase to a 55% reductions by 2030. And I assume all the Nordic countries will participate in that renewed commitment. In addition, in the Helsingfors Declaration, all the Nordic countries pledged to work towards carbon neutrality. And to that end, all the nations have set their own climate or carbon neutrality goals. For example, Norway aims to reach neutrality by 2030, Finland 2035, Iceland in 2040, Sweden in 45, and Denmark in 2050. So that is great. However, consumption-based targets have yet to be considered, where emissions due to consumptive items produced abroad are also included. And we here in the Nordics need to pay attention to this because we have very large ecological and carbon footprints. Second, let's look at the plans and the progress. It is not enough to have a goal, there has to be some progress towards them. And if we exclude emissions linked to LULUCF, 3 of the Nordics have significantly reduced their greenhouse gas emissions since 1990. Finland has reduced emissions by 21%, Sweden by 27%, and Denmark by 30%. However, Norway has increased its emissions by 1% and Iceland by 30%. And then when looking a little bit closer at where the mitigation is taking place, significant success has been reached, for example, in mitigating emissions from electricity generation as well as from waste. But for the Nordics as a whole, sectors such as heavy industry, agriculture, and transport have a long way to go towards the climate targets. And according to Nordic Energy Research, much additional effort is still needed. Third, let's look at the means that are used to reach these stated targets. And the plans put forward are very different, ranging from actually not having a plan, Iceland, to Norway, allowing for mitigation actions in other countries, to Denmark and Finland that aim to reach their targets with domestic action only. But rather than to actually look very closely at the plans, I actually want to highlight 4 elements where I think the Nordic countries should or could excel and should excel and secure their climate frontrunner status. First, we must push for low carbon development. And to do that, policymakers should be more creative and more brave with the actions and the policies implemented. And policymakers, they have to use the entire arsenal of policy tools. Price greenhouse gas emissions properly, not only carbon, but greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, enable innovative financing and incentives. And in particular, as the Nordic governments are now creating public investment packages to stimulate the Nordic economies after COVID, we have a unique opportunity to change course towards low carbon development. And part of the government stimulus packages could, for example, come with some conditionality towards low carbon investment and development. We could envision greener financial systems, more physical infrastructure investment, and investment in education and training, leading to, as I said, low carbon development. Second, innovation systems should be shaped more towards low carbon development. And we know that strategic government spending can facilitate innovation. And here the Nordic governments could choose specific focal points, such as, for example, carbon capture, storage, and use. They could provide patient capital, grants, and low-interest loans, to name a few. Third, the Nordics should ensure that the transition to a carbon neutrality is a just transition. This could include to secure people's right to work, strengthen people's training to work in new sectors, if that is needed, and to make sure that those that have lower income will not carry a disproportionate impact of, for example, higher carbon taxes. And finally, fourth, governments should engage the public, both in the vision towards carbon neutrality and the action plans. Because the vision towards carbon neutrality should not only be the government's plan. The vision and the plan should be the people's vision and the people's plan. To conclude, a low carbon economy is the only economy of the future. And the Nordics have ambitious goals and are on the right track in some sectors. Now we need to show the rest of the world that other sectors, such as transport, agriculture, and industries, can be decarbonized as well, and that we are brave enough to consider consumption-based targets as well. And that we can do all of this while rebuilding our economies after the COVID crisis, ensuring prosperity of the region, and making sure that no one is left behind. And if the Nordics can do this, then we can claim our spot as climate frontrunners. Thank you.
Much, Brynhildur. And that was a good reminder. It's not only the challenging goals, it's also progress and challenging methods we need in this moment. We have a panel with the members from all our countries that is preparing, but before we let them start, I want to welcome a guest from the heart of Europe. Maria Wetterstrand is a former parliamentarian from Sweden for many years. She was one of the spokespersons for the Swedish Green Party. And today she is a consultant and she is joining us from Brussels. Maria, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome to our program.
Thank you very much.
How would you say, you are going to give us a European view on our efforts here in the Nordic. How would you say that Nordic climate action is seen upon from a European perspective?
Well, I would say that undoubtedly we are seen as frontrunners, usually supporters of the most ambitious initiatives when it comes to climate change. But of course, there are also a few issues where we might meet a little bit of opposition in the EU.
What kind of opposition do you?
Well, I would say one of the most important things is the bioeconomy. We have large forests in the Nordics, especially in Sweden and Finland, and we have focused in the last years a lot on the bioeconomy and developing that as a solution to climate change. And in the EU, where forests are not as abundant as they are in the Nordics, the view on forestry is a little bit different, where we meet a lot of skepticism towards the bioeconomy as such, since the forests are also seen as an important carbon sink. So we have to show them that we can sustainably manage our forests at the same time as we focus on the bioeconomy and using the forests as a solution to climate change. And if we can't show that we do this sustainably and also protect biodiversity, I think that the bioeconomy might lose out in the EU in the long run. So that's one important issue for the Nordics, that we can combine sustainability and bioeconomy here.
The EU is, with its Green Deal, also very ambitious, has a very ambitious climate agenda. But the European countries have actually, many European countries have been hit even harder than the Nordics with COVID-19. How has that affected their climate ambitions?
I would say that those countries who were already ambitious before, they see this as a reason to invest in solutions that will also solve the problem of climate change, while those countries who were skeptic before are even more skeptic now because of the hit towards their economies. And they feel that the COVID crisis is a sort of excuse to, well, postpone a little bit of the climate action, so to say.
And last, very shortly, how prepared do you think that the European countries are to accept Nordic leadership in climate issues?
Maybe not as much as we would hope. They have their own problems to look at, and even if they see that the Nordics are frontrunners, they also see that we are also strong economically, which might not be the case in all the other countries, so they don't really compare with us in that aspect. So we can show them the way by also developing new technologies and showing them that it's possible to reduce climate impact at the same time as we have a strong economy. So I think that if we manage to do that, and also our industries continue to be engaged in these issues, we might be able to influence also the other countries and industries in other parts of Europe.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you.
And with that, we go forward. And now I'm very happy to present our first panel today. And I'll start by presenting our guest here in Copenhagen, Nadia Gullstrand Christensen, Danish youth delegate to the UN in the field of climate and environment. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you so much.
And then we have Karle Kupiainen in Helsinki. Karle is chairman for the Nordic Working Group for Climate and Air. Welcome. We have Simon Holmström, Secretary General of Regeneration 2030. Simon is in Helsinki, but he is actually from the Åland Islands. We have Olav Öje, Senior Advisor for Climate and Industry from the Bellona Foundation, a non-profit organization that fights the climate change. Olav is in Oslo. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
And we have Haldor Torgeirsson, Chair for the Icelandic Climate Council. Haldor, before assuming that the role that he has now, he served in several strategic positions at the UN Climate Change Secretariat. Haldor is joining us from Reykjavik. Welcome. And we had Tinna Hallgrímsdóttir, Iceland's youth delegate to the UN in the field of sustainable development. And Tinna is also with us from Reykjavik. You're all extremely welcome. And let me start by a comment to what you just heard Brynhildur say. Our goals are ambitious, but we need more action. How realistic do you think that it is that policymakers in the Nordics now, during COVID-19, will have the strength to take creative and brave climate action? Who wants to start? Nadia is ready.
Sure, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. When I'm really happy for this invitation, it is also because, as Brynhildur said, engaging the public is extremely important. And I see this event as a really good example of that, where you are collaborating with people from so many parts of the society and between generations. Thank you for that. So to answer the question, I think that the part with creative and innovation is really important, because to actually reach those targets, we need to think in new ways. So of course it is amazing and important that we set those higher targets, but to actually reach them, we need to think in new ways and to collaborate with more people. And I would love to talk more about that later, but I think that we need to go to talk to the solutions and not only the goals, because goals are only like a number on a piece of paper. We need to talk about the solutions.
Carle, did you wave there? Do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you very much. So also thank you for the invitation to this very important and good panel. I see that the technique is functioning very well, so nice to see you all. Well, first of all, we have to understand that the pandemic is still ongoing, so we should also carefully evaluate how a situation develops and eventually then look at the recovery situation. But in general, all of us in the Nordics have taken the step towards a green recovery, and we have also a political commitment from the Nordic side in the ministerial declaration that indeed we want to be the global leaders as well as take the green step in the recovery plan. I think this is very important as a first step, and then also we as a working group evaluate then eventually how these policies are taking place. But as said, we're still under the pandemic, sadly. Thank you.
But let me ask then, we have done some progress. I think that is, everybody can agree on that. But how about the most demanding areas? Industry, traffic and agriculture. Why are these so difficult for us? Haldor, maybe you could answer that.
Well, I think it's really important, though, that we focus on where we're going with these things. And if you focus in on the difficulties, you lose hope. This is why I really believe that we need to actually take the full step as Nordic nations to embrace the vision of zero carbon. And I don't think we've done that quite yet. Yes, it's good that we do have a clear vision from the kind of heads of state level, but have we really thought through what a zero carbon Nordic region really looks like? And are we taking the steps to realize that vision? I don't think so yet. And this is why it's actually a race to zero that we are all engaged with. And to maintain competitiveness and the high standard of living, we need to now invest in the future we want. Because, and this is such a critical moment now, because there's going to be huge investments. And those investments could take us further away from where we need to go or move us closer to it. And this is why I actually think that we need to be stronger in actually visualizing the future and then backcasting from that to the investment that we need to make today. And I really, it's almost like moving from knowing something intellectually with your brain to actually move it to internalize it and make it part of your instinct. And I think the final point I would caution against us looking too much as front runners, because that can lead to complacency, and we really can't afford that now. Others will catch up very quickly, and we are coming to tipping points on many of these key ingredients of the future economy. And if we don't act faster, it will be more expensive for us to make the transition. And so incrementalism is not a solution here. We need to move to a transformative forward steps.
I can see that Simon Holmström has a comment.
Thank you so much for that. I think we can draw some experience from how we tackle the COVID-19 and transfer that into climate area as well. Because what we've seen is that we're listening to the scientists. We have, as people, shown support for the drastic measures that governments and the recommendations have put on us. And also, we have been able to change behaviors quite drastically when it comes to transport, when it comes to consumption, and also kind of, dragging down on your stress levels and feeling, what do I really need? Do I need to go and buy these things and so on? So this change in behaviors and this kind of support for the general public, you know, I think that's really important to also transfer to how we should tackle the climate crisis. And then let me suggest that we have weekly press conferences on the climate issue, that we go out with public recommendations how to act, and not just talking about it in these kinds of conferences. I think that would actually highlight the risk that the climate crisis actually puts on us.
Olav, you had a comment as well. I could see you wave.
I completely agree that we should not be complacent at all. And to take the country in which I am now, Norway, the priority of the Norwegian government and government and parliament has largely been to incentivize further oil and gas activities, which has been. There's also been some funds going to green measures, but they have been dwarfed by the oil and gas incentives. However, there are some very positive developments in Norwegian industry decarbonization policies, and that also connects to decarbonization activities in other Nordic countries. And that has to do with CO2 capture and storage. Since Norway is now planning to develop an offtake infrastructure offshore of the coast of Bergen for carbon dioxide from industries, not only in Norway, but also in Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, France, Germany, other countries. I think we are seeing the beginning of a real Northern European, Nordic in particular, cooperation on industry and how to decarbonize industry. And this is the positive thing about this. It is not only a government initiative. There's also been several big industry players in Denmark and in Sweden who are now saying that they want to capture and store carbon dioxide. And I think Sweden in particular has had a lot of dialogue with Norway when it comes to how to cooperate on the infrastructure, because these are massive, these are multi-billion investments in transport and storage infrastructure. So it looks very big on any budget, but it also makes for very big emissions cuts. For example, the cement factory that is now being planned to capture and store CO2 now in Norway makes up almost 1% of Norway's total carbon dioxide emissions. And this will be similar for plants in other countries too. So there's definitely some positive development going on right now.
And that's very good. And I can hear that you want not to focus so much on the problems, but more on the solutions. And I completely agree on that. I was thinking about what Haldor said about the zero carbon society, and that we should think about what it really will look like. And I'd like to ask you, Tinna, what do you think? What kind of a mindset change do we need in order for us to really get to the society that is a zero carbon society?
Well, I think, as has been mentioned before, that the most important thing is to realize that the zero carbon society is coming, whether we are ready or not, and we need to know that this is the goal and this is going to happen, and how ready are we going to be and how fast are we going to react? Also just to ensure competitiveness, but also to ensure that we can create this, that we can make the transformation be just, so that we can ensure that it will be a well-being society as well.
Brynhildur also talked about the opportunity to now change course towards a low-carbon development. For example, by defining specific conditions that to get the subsidies that governments pay now for the recovery after COVID-19. But what kind of conditions would be realistic to ask for from those that need the subsidies so much right now? Yes, Tinna.
Yeah, so I feel that now when we're using public funding to help industry, I feel like we need to put some kind of emission reduction targets for those industries, especially having emitting ones like airlines. And when we're providing state guaranteed loans, we need to put some kind of conditions Also, when governments have been paying, for example, a part of the resignation notice periods of some companies, then we're definitely trying to save companies right now, not necessarily jobs in this period. And then we need to make sure that those companies that receive this kind of governmental support need to have some kind of climate action plan or climate reduction targets or any other sort of those commissions. Otherwise, we will not see a holistic resurrection. We will only see increased climate funding to some specific areas, but all the rest will not transform by itself. Then we will just reach the same pathway as we were on before COVID.
Nadia, you are nodding here. Do you have something to add, or do you just agree?
I do agree, but I of course also have something to add. I think the topic of the company's role in climate change and climate action is really interesting, because some people would only see them as the enemy, because we have seen so many oil and gas companies really being the enemy when it comes to creating a sustainable world. But we do also see a lot of companies around the world really taking responsibility in organizations such as UN Global Compact and in a lot of other ways. And I think it is really important that we as a civil society and we as governments and all that, we are supporting and pushing those companies that is really taking responsibility. And I think that we have examples such as renewable energy companies, Ørsted in Denmark, Vestas. We have so many renewable energy companies that is really doing an amazing job. And we need to get other companies around the world to be inspired by our renewable energy companies so that more companies would do the transition. Ørsted in Denmark once was an oil and gas major and was really a bad company. But they made a change and now they are earning even more than they did before. So it's also amazing to see how being sustainable can also be profitable.
I have a question now about a divided society, actually, because all of you here in all our Nordic countries, you agree that climate change is a threat to society and to the planet as well. But there is still a substantial group of people in our societies that don't agree with you. They think that this is just fake news. If we really want a transition, and a mindset change, how do we create a dialogue between these two groups? Because I think that will be completely necessary. Do you, Haldor, have an idea about that?
Yes, this is hugely important, and it's key to actually turning this into people's vision. But here we also have to be honest. There has been a lot of organized disinformation, and that has affected the public perception. Not so much in the Nordic region, but in important countries. And that is something that now has to be turned around. If you focus too much on the problem, you instill fear. But we also have to be credible in terms of the transition. And this is why, let me just take a very concrete example here in Iceland. We have based our recent growth in tourism basically on fossil fuels, while Iceland is blessed with renewables. We now need to reinvent tourism because people are now going to be learning again to travel. And that needs to be, we need to be able to show them here how you can actually, in a responsible way, travel around the island, not as we have done up to this point, where we basically expect them all to go to a rental company, rent a petrol car and drive around the island. That has explained a lot of the recent growth in emissions from Iceland. We cannot go back to that type of tourism. And this is why we have to be bold in helping people that actually are inventing a future that is attractive. And Iceland actually can show the nations what a zero carbon future looks like, and combine it with safety and clean air. and only by showing people credible, give them hope, basically. Because vested interests have been scaring the hell out of them, actually, to be honest. And we have to reverse that.
So you are counting on facts and hope, I can hear that. Olav, do you also think that facts and hope will be enough?
I think well, facts and hope are can take you quite far. And I think some of the facts that are out there, some of the claims that are out there, for example, about the energy transition being too expensive, are also sometimes false. And it depends on how you look at it. I think one of the big problems is that many fear, rightly so, fear losing their jobs if they think that their cement plant, steel mill, chemicals factory will be shut down, because these are very energy intensive and carbon intensive industries. So I think the way of raising hope in these sectors is to show where we can actually cut emissions. Sometimes it will be by electrification, sometimes it will be by energy efficiency, sometimes it will be by applying carbon capture and storage, which would allow to reduce emissions, maybe not all the way to zero, but very close for many industries. And that will allow these jobs to exist also in a low carbon economy. And another claim that is problematic is that this is expensive. And for example, to take cement, which is responsible for more than 5% of global carbon dioxide emissions, if you apply carbon capture and storage for a cement plant, you might double the price of the cement. But if you look at the price of a building, where cement is only one of the components, the climate mitigation price is rather cheap. You increase the total price of the building by a few percent. Chalmers University in Gothenburg and others have done very good calculations on this, and it shows that if you look at it and organize it in the right way, it doesn't need to be expensive.
I think I'll go forward to the next question, and that has to do with sense of urgency. Because during this COVID situation, many quite big and urgent and radical measures have been taken very, very fast, because we needed to be protected from the virus. Now, what should be done in order to create the same kind of sense of urgency when it comes to the climate issue? I think that that could be one way, even though I realize that what you're saying is that we shouldn't focus on the problems, but on the solutions. But how about the sense of urgency? Is that a way forward? Karle, how about you? Do you have a comment to this?
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, according to the polls, a large share of citizens are indeed worried about climate change and environment issues. So we have a good building ground, I would say, in the Nordics. But then the second is to take this issue to the center of the debate, because that is when you start thinking about the solutions and the goals and everything. And we have that also actually happening. And I think it was Brynhildur who mentioned the just transition, and also many in the panel have noted that we indeed should leave no one behind. So we have to find the social acceptance of policies. And this, of course, calls for innovative design of policies that are acceptable for people. And I agree with many in the panel that there is a lot of discussion of expensive policies, which perhaps actually are not that expensive eventually. So also the analysis basis of the policy should be there. And of course, we from the Nordic Council of Ministers working group side are happy to join this task as well. Thank you.
You were again, Nadia, waving here.
Yeah, I'm sorry if it is maybe a new perspective, but it was just when he brought up the principle of leaving no one behind, I thought of the fact that it's actually really important that we keep that in mind, and also that there's no one. And I see a huge urgency in helping other countries to get a renewable and sustainable transition, because often we focus on ourselves. And we have goals for our countries, like the Danish government having 70% reduction targets. We focus a lot about ourselves, but sometimes I would at least hope that we would focus more on other countries and to also sense an urgency of that. And that could be stuff like foreign aid and climate aid, and we are not focusing that much about that. And when we are talking about climate aid, then we are not using more money on the foreign aid, then we're taking money from other places and using it on climate aid. And that is an urgent problem in my perspective, because just because we have climate challenge doesn't mean that we don't have challenges with education, with gender equality, and so many health, hunger, so many other issues all over the world. So I think that there is a huge urgency of taking responsibility outside our own countries and beyond the Nordic.
Simon, you had a comment.
According to the polls in the Nordic countries, people are already worried, very worried. But I think there's a lack of risk understanding in policy making and in businesses. So I would say that we should be much better in promoting those who are already doing good and promoting mobilization for promoting this, for pushing for this. Youth are already driving this change, starting new businesses, going into politics as I've done, starting new NGOs and so on. And we should finance that mobilization. We should promote that mobilization, because we're in the stage where climate anxiety takes over kind of the positive outcomes that a climate transition could entail. So I would say, instead of having this climate anxiety and frustration boiling, there should be a platform for intergenerational dialogue, and this is done too little, I would say. We should discuss this more, and by promoting a people's movement and having contacts and networks and links, then I would say that we can brew optimism, instead of having the old people being there, inviting youth and taking selfies and so on. I think this should be something that is done very continuously. We should be much better there.
Yes, I think Brynhilde very much would agree with you. She was speaking about the people's vision and the people's action plan. So I think that is a way forward. I want, before we finish, because unfortunately we don't have that much time left, but I want to go back to the pandemic for just a second, because some of the consequences of the pandemic have actually been favorable to the climate. The most obvious maybe is that flight traffic has gone down very, very dramatically during the pandemic. We know that most probably flying will resume after the pandemic is gone, at least to some extent. But are there other possible positive changes that you think might become permanent? Nadia?
Sure. I think another, of course, it's really interesting with the whole flying and people flying less, and that is, of course, really amazing. But I think another interesting perspective is that we have seen oil prices declining, and that we have seen oil prices being not that secure at all. And that is showing, we have already talked a lot about the importance of renewable energy and the importance of the energy transition. So I really hope that in the Build Back Better, the build out of renewable energy is also going to be a really huge part of that, because when it comes to stuff like flying, I don't think that we are looking into a future where the population of the world are going to fly less. We are maybe going to fly the same as we're doing now in the best case, but we are actually seeing predictions that we will be flying more in the long future. So we need to find a way to, how is it possible to find alternatives to planes such as trains? And then when people are going to fly, we have to have solutions such as hydrogen or power to X or similar other energy sources so that we can make flying more sustainable. So when it comes to Build Back Better, we need to keep the energy sector in mind, because with the energy sector, we can also make a transition in other sectors, such as flying and the transport, as you were mentioning.
Thank you, Nadia. And just a short comment to Halder, and then we'll have to wrap this up, unfortunately.
One thing we have learned from the COVID crisis is that it gives governments a mandate to actually impose restrictions and to take bold action, and that's what we need to learn from on climate. And part of the anxiety arising from news about climate is that people don't trust that governments and society is doing enough. And so it's actually quite important to use this moment now, which is essentially a moment of reflection or time out, where we can actually assess things. And it's really through crises that most of the changes that we have seen in the past have occurred. And let's be ready also for this. Is going to be a very difficult winter on the COVID front, and we are going to be learning more, unfortunately. And we really need to use that to now muster the will to actually, we need to flatten the curve also on climate, just like we have been flattening the curve on COVID. So I think there are a lot of concepts that the general public now understands that they didn't understand a year ago. And it's really important that we seize that moment to actually make a step change in action on climate change, not incremental improvements.
Thank you very much. And actually, what I, of course, did forget in the beginning was to remind you that are watching us from out there in the world, that you can, if you have questions for our panel, you can send them to us on our Facebook event. So please do now, because now is time for questions. And we'll start by questions from our physical audiences. We have audiences due to COVID, of course. We don't have audiences everywhere because it's not allowed. But here in Copenhagen and in Helsinki, we have audiences. And I'd like to ask our audience here in Copenhagen, does anyone have a question for our panel? Okay, if you have a question, please, I'd ask you in that case to come here in front and ask the question here by the microphone. This is your opportunity, so please take it now because time is running. I can see people that are almost getting up. Thank you, and you can remove your face mask while you ask.
Some animals, like in Iceland, the puffins, their environment where they live is being ruined by climate change and the water's warming. What actions are you considering taking to conserve their environment and keep them alive while we reduce the climate change?
Thank you very much. And that was a biodiversity question. Who wants to answer that one? And Nadia, you won't be allowed because you have been talking so much. So maybe we try, how about Tinna? Do you have an answer to what we should do about biodiversity?
Well, I don't know specifically about the puffin, but I feel just in general we need to realize that climate change and biodiversity are interlinked subjects, and I feel that now we've been having some progress in raising public consensus about what biodiversity really is and how important it is, because these have often been seen like two different topics while they're just two sides of the same coin. So I think just to integrate biodiversity thinking and biodiversity goal into all our climate action is of course crucial, and that applies to the puffin and everything else as well.
Yeah, I hope that was an answer. We don't have politicians in our panels here, so we can just hope that these people will take your worry forward. I think if I don't see any action here now, I'll go to Helsinki. How about Helsinki? Do we have some questions from the audience in Helsinki now?
Yes, we do. Here's a question. Okay, hi, my name is Nadia. First of all, thank you to the panelists for a great discussion. It's been really interesting. And then you talked a lot about cooperation and the importance of kind of acting together. I was wondering, how could the Nordic countries help each other in the green transition more than today?
Okay, that was a very concrete question, and I think we are going to start now with Kaarle, who is actually in Helsinki as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the question, very important one. Yes, I guess it's, I take it as my heart, to my heart to answer this question, because I currently lead this working group that actually facilitates the cooperation between the Nordic countries. And first of all, we conduct a lot of studies, and we want to spread the news or spread the word about Nordic solutions to the world. For example, we conducted a study just recently that indicated the best available solutions in climate sphere from the Nordic countries, and we identified more than 15 solutions. And if applied worldwide, this would reduce CO2 emissions by 25%. So this also maybe relates a little bit to the frontrunner issue, that indeed we have solutions that could be taken outside. Also, it is important that the Nordics, if not coordinate, but is in dialogue together in terms of the negotiations and the UNFCCC, for example. This is something that we have an ongoing process. And of course, also climate diplomacy in general. So we should raise our voices in other countries as well, not only in Europe, but also, for example, in North America. And I know that the Nordic heads of states have been invited to the White House, for example, to talk about these issues in not so quite long history. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there somebody else who would like to answer? I have one here on the stage in Copenhagen who very much wants to answer. And I think I let Olav first, because you haven't been heard that much yet.
I wanted to highlight this. One thing is the cooperation on the national or Nordic level between Nordic countries. But another thing that I have seen more up close is a very good cooperation between Nordic cities, most notably the Nordic capitals, who worked with whom we worked on writing a report almost 1 year ago on how to reduce emissions, for example, from not only from waste incineration and energy generation, but also this embodied carbon, the emissions that are produced elsewhere, which can be emitted if cities who are big buyers of materials, construction materials in particular, which constitute a large share of our embodied emissions, so products that we buy. And I think this is the type of examples that are often easier to cooperate on, because cities have a lot of purchasing power. There's often a big will, both among politicians and civil servants, who are sometimes more agile than nation states are in cooperating and navigating and finding good examples. The climate budget of the city of Oslo is a very good example of how you look at all the different sectors. What are your emissions within the city boundaries, but also the emissions that are generated elsewhere, in China, in Brazil, in the United States, or in Europe, when you buy products such as materials.
Okay, actually, now what's the time to take in online question? But I will let both Nadia and Simon answer this, because we got an online question that is actually very, very close to what Nadia just asked in Helsinki. In what areas would you like to see joint Nordic cooperation efforts and ambitions to speed up a joint Nordic climate transition? So please, Simon, you will get to start, and then Nadia.
Thank you so much. We heard the professor saying that the Nordic countries have different climate targets, about neutrality, Finland is 2035 and Denmark 2050 and so on. I think this is absurd. Why shouldn't we have one common target for the Nordics? I actually tried to work for this within the Nordic Council, but it was voted down with the result 7-5. So we got something to do here, to push politicians within the Nordics to come together, set a common date, common end date of fossil fuels, or a target of net negative, and then do budgets, carbon budgets, looking into the transport sector, the food sector, any sector really, together, because that is the only way we can achieve the Nordic vision of being the the most sustainable and integrated region in the entire world. I think this is really important to set the strategic planning in place.
Okay, Nadia, you get the last word here.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So thank you so much for the question. And I think there is a lot of different topics where it makes a lot of sense. To point out a few, we have already been talking a lot about renewable energy and the energy sector. I think that it would make a lot of sense to have better grid connections between the countries. And if you're building an offshore wind farm in the sea between the countries, we already see that you can then have renewable energy in all of the countries from that offshore wind farms. So building out renewable energy together would really be amazing. And then secondly, we have also been talking a lot about the importance of innovation and young people. And I think that what I really hope for more of is collaboration between young people from the different countries. We already have really good stuff like Nordics, which is enabling young people from universities to go abroad and study at another university from another country in the Nordic. More stuff like that is really important so that young people can find future solutions with other young people from the Nordic, because we have a lot of experiences, but we are different people in a way, and we have different backgrounds. And with getting those people together, I think that we can really find some of those solutions that is really needed.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And thank you also to Brynhildur, Maria, Karle, Simon, Tinna, Haldor, and Olav, and of course the audience here and in Helsinki and out there. And unfortunately, no more time for questions now, but don't leave us because we have a whole day in front of us. The next session will start in just a couple of minutes, and with a new set of guests, we will continue deep diving into the issue of how far we actually have come, but now Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our climate summit. And I am so sorry for the delay, but these things happen when you are in the middle of a live transmission. 5 years ago, the Nordic prime ministers launched an initiative called the Nordic Solution to Global Challenges. The idea was to support and spread Nordic solutions, ideas, and values that would speed up the progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The values or the ideas that we highlighted then were green transition, equality, and welfare. The target groups were mostly outside our own region, and the idea was not only to tell others about our solutions, but also to create a dialogue and get more ideas, information about what others do and what we could do better than we do. Now 5 years have gone, and it's time to look forward. Which Nordic solutions, values, and ideas are effective and good enough to share with the rest of the world right now? What messages from the Nordics should we bring with us to COP26 next year? What kind of a role could and should a region like the Nordic play globally? And how much global responsibility should we be prepared to take? For the next discussion, we have gathered a panel of influencers who will very probably be among those who lead us in 10, 15 years' time at the latest. Let me introduce the next Nordic panel and our stages. And I'll start again here in Copenhagen. Here I am with Emma Holten. Welcome. Emma is a feminist activist and a gender policy advisor at Oxfam IBIS here in Denmark. In Helsinki, we have Amos Wallgren. Amos is a climate justice activist, a member of Extinction Rebellion, by its Finnish name Elokapina, and he is, as said, in Helsinki. Welcome, Amos. In Oslo, we have Markus Bruns. Markus is Nordic Head of Sustainability at Storebrand and CEO of Young Sustainable Impact, which is a global non-profit helping young entrepreneurs build impact startups in Norway. And you are in Oslo, and welcome, Markus.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by two persons who are not on our stages, but out in the world doing important things, studying. Aldis Mjøl-Geirsdatter, President of the Nordic Youth Council this year, or actually next year, and is already now chosen. Aldis is joining us from Brussels. Welcome. Are you there, Aldis?
Thank you. Hopefully. Yes, I'm here.
Very good. And Henrietta Flodell is a Green Recovery Research Assistant. She researches on intersections between COVID-19 and climate change at the University of Oxford. She is Swedish, but you are in Oxford, aren't you, Henrietta?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for having me.
And welcome to all of you. But before I'll let you start talking, we will hear a message from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres. And this one is from approximately 2 weeks ago.
The United Nations will continue to do all it can to ensure ambitious climate action consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. This includes limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, facilitating the transition to climate-resilient economies, especially in the developing world, and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Currently, the world is way off track. It is essential that we rebuild our economies from the pandemic through effective climate action that will create millions of better jobs, promote cleaner and more efficient technologies, and bring better health worldwide. To that end, we are promoting 6 climate-positive actions that countries and other stakeholders can take to effect a sustainable economic recovery from COVID-19. invest in sustainable jobs and businesses, ensure no more bailouts to polluting industries and then subsidies to fossil fuels, especially coal, consider climate risks in all financial decisions and policy making, work together in a common cause, and ensure that no one is left behind. In all these, we count on the leadership of the Nordic countries. The nations you represent have historically been among the strongest advocates of ambitious climate action and of the Sustainable Development Goals. The world needs your leadership now more than ever.
Could hear what Mr. Guterres said, but I can tell you that he really urged the Nordics to take leadership. And he was talking about justice and no one should be left behind. And also he had a 6-point list of what should be done exactly now. I'm so sorry about the fact that you didn't hear him, because his expectations for us are really, really high. Even though you didn't hear him, Henrietta, I thought I would start with you. Guterres said there, even though you didn't hear it, that he wants the Nordics to show leadership. In which areas do you think that the Nordics actually could take leadership on a global level?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, and really sorry I didn't hear him, but I'll try to address your question. So I think an experience that struck me while being in the UK is that while the Nordic solutions and successes are very much heralded and admired, they're also, I think, seen as a bit more intimidating than inspiring, possibly, as we have come really far. And I think that's a really important and humbling lesson for us to take, that maybe our job isn't so much to push our solutions forward, because we do appear as a bit of a unicorn, but rather to say, these are the lessons we learned, and let's help other countries accelerate and not do the mistakes we made, and to show that this is in no way a faction of us having had peace for hundreds of years or having a strong welfare system, but there are actually ways in which we can apply these solutions on other contexts. But I think it's very important to do so humbly.
So actually help others learn from our experiences rather than taking our solutions out to them is what it's what you say. Do you agree, the other ones that we have here? Can I get an answer from you, Emma?
Yeah, I think that one of the mistakes we sometimes make is that we look at our countries and the energy production within our own countries, and then we say, oh, the Nordic countries are a great success. But I think we also need to look at the emissions that the Nordic consumption is producing other places. So for example, a report we recently published in Oxfam shows that 10% of the world's population, the richest 10% in income of the world's population, are responsible for 52% of the emissions. And obviously there are a lot of wealthy people in Scandinavia compared to the rest of the world. So we tend to look at ourselves as this ideal, but if everyone lived the way a Scandinavian does, you know, there would be nothing that looks like resources enough for everybody. So I think that we also need to look at our own, if we use the feminist term, our own privileges and our own power, and looking at our own ways of life and saying, can this way of life be replicated exactly in other places? And I really don't think it can. So I think we can look at what's working in our own countries. I think that's good. But also, how are we sometimes outsourcing the issues that we're creating in other places? Because that's where I think that Scandinavia really still has a lot to do.
Amos, actually, you are a climate justice activist. So what Emma just said actually, I suppose, resonates quite well with what you think, or am I right?
Sure, you are right. I mean, for me, the reason I chose to call myself a climate justice activist is that I see climate and justice as inseparable. And secondly, I mean, I'm involved in mobilizations against fossil fuels, and I mean, the struggles for a just transition or systemic change, as I like to call it. So yes, I think there's many strong points to the Nordic model, the Nordic welfare model, but on ecological terms, we can't be too happy about our current situation, especially considering our consumption and the, for example, involvement of state-owned energy companies abroad, which are still very much dependent on fossil fuels. So yes, I think there's much to do even on a local scale, but I think the Nordic country still, or the Nordic model of combination of welfare policies with a strong democratic and peaceful tradition is an example to share globally, even though it's maybe not ecologically perfect.
Okay, well, if we really want a transition or a real change, then it's not only the politicians and the policymakers, of course, but it's everyone that should in one way or another be engaged. How important is the role of the private sector, do you think, here? And I'd like to ask Markus that question.
Yeah, I think the private sector is going to be crucial in reaching these goals, both when it comes to the private sector in isolation, but also in collaboration with the different governments. So I come from the finance industry, so where I'm representing Norway's largest private asset manager. So for us, it's really important to invest in companies that we actually believe are suitable for the future. So we're looking for companies that are actually part of finding the solutions to the megatrends that we are seeing. And I think there's huge opportunities. We've been talking about the $12 trillion opportunities related to the SDGs, and I really think that kind of discussing more on the opportunity side and what is actually possible is an important thing to do. And also back to the question before, when it comes to that, we've come far in the Nordics, and for that reason, we can start to kind of shape out the knowledge elsewhere. I think it's also important to state that we have done a lot in the Nordics, but we still have a long way to go. We've done a lot within renewable energy, solar, wind, hydro, but I think we can still kind of increase that and show real leadership within that area.
Aldis, when you listen to this now, what do you think? How proactive should a region like ours be? I mean, what should we do? Should we wait for others to react, or should we actually be proactively now and be in contact, for example, with actors from other countries?
I think that we should be, in fact, really proactive. And if I go a little bit back to the first question, while I agree with Henrietta that we should be humble in our approach, I still think that we should set the bar high, and we should be ambitious in reaching our goals and committing to them. And I think that even though the Nordic countries are doing good in comparison, we still have a long way to go. So I think that's a very important point to make, that even though we're doing good in comparison, we really have a long way to go, and we should be ambitious on committing to our goals. And a little bit on the lifestyle changes, in the previous panel, they talked about the opportunities that we have now because of COVID. We see that people can change their lifestyles because of the situation we are in now, and we should really use that momentum right now to impose changes on our lifestyles in the Nordic countries because of the climate crisis. We see that we can, so we should also implement those changes concerning climate crisis.
Thank you, Aldis. And now actually I want to remind Aldis and Henrietta specifically, as I can't see you all the time, please, if you want to say something, could you just make a sound so that I know that you want to say something, because the other ones are visible to me, but you are not constantly. But Emma, you had a comment there to what Aldis just said.
Yeah, I really agree with Aldis that I think that Corona has been reaching into basically every aspect of our lives and has really shown actually how adaptable human beings are, what we can do. We're having a conference in a way right now that none of us would have imagined to do 1 year ago. And it's just to give kind of another stat, because I think that we need to look, because we all know that we live in an incredibly unequal world. We know that there are incredibly wealthy, privileged people in the world, and there are people who have so much less than other people. And if we look at the top 10% of the world, like I said, that's a lot of us. If the top 10% lowered their consumption or their emissions to the EU average, we would actually lower the
combined emissions by 25%. So I think it's incredibly important to say that the people with the most power, the people with the most wealth, are the people who, from an individual standpoint, have the most possibility of impacting the entire system. So if you are a farmer in Africa, there is literally extremely little you can do. Yet we constantly talk about, that there are too many people are being born, stuff like that. But what we actually need to look like is that a rather small group of individuals are using a tremendous amount of resources, whereas millions and millions, billions of people, 50% of the world's population, are only doing 7% of the emissions. So actually, like, there is a top layer here that really needs to be our focus. And I think that is a place where, and I also think that what you mentioned about the Nordic values of equality, that we have had a strong values of societies that are equal, where we meet one another, where there are no one who is too poor and no one who is extremely rich, and that we can look at how can we apply that sort of value globally. Because I think that's something that we're really going to need, because I think it's only fair that people in Africa also get a right to have the kind of lives most people in Scandinavia have and that they have been denied. So if they need to lift their standards of living, we need to recalibrate the ways that we're living. And I think that's going to be really one of the big challenges for us, because we are so privileged in many ways.
Do we have a comment to this from some of the other? No, because I would like to, because what you are talking about is actually a responsibility, a very, very strong global responsibility, actually something that in many ways, maybe many politicians in the Nordics would like very much actually to put more of a responsibility on a global level than on what we do. How do you feel that politicians actually are listening to that kind of argument that you just made? Are you being heard?
I think politicians think that these challenges are quite big and quite scary, is my impression. And they have a tendency to focus a lot on the individual, that the individual should, shop in a different way, eat less meat, buy a better car, stuff like that. But I think if there's anything that I've learned, and I must say, a lot of the things that I've learned about climate, I've learned from activists who are younger than myself, who are in the Green Students movements, who are in Extinction Rebellion. I think they're teaching us something. I'm almost 30. I'm an old climate activist almost. And what they have taught me is that we cannot solve this on an individual level. Structural change is needed in the general way that we are distributing capital and resources in our societies through our economic structures, how we are distributing resources on the global level. And I think that for a politician to really show bravery, it's to show that you are willing to look at the actual structures and not only reduce this to individual responsibility. And I don't think, unfortunately, that we're seeing enough of that. There's a lot of focus on consumption patterns of the individuals, and I would love to be able to raise it above that and look at what is the role of us globally, and what role are we playing in the global economic structure as consumers, as producers, etc.
Can I see Amos waving there? Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think, Emma, you're describing the current situation very well, and I think this personally coming and identifying with a new rise in social mobilizations for climate justice, since in the latest years, maybe Greta Thunberg as the most prominent spokesperson for this generational experience. I think there has been many great, I've heard the words innovation and different solutions, and young people given a podium to stand on for years. And I think the first time the arguments said today by Emma and said by Greta Thunberg were heard on a global scale were in 1992 by Seven Suzuki in the Earth Summit. So I mean, we've known the facts, and we've together tried to reach global solutions under the slogan of sustainable development. But there's a big but. I mean, there's something that has not, the emissions have only doubled. So there's something not working with the business as usual, clearly. And that's to the degree we are proposing something wholly new in these conversations before COP26 is an open question. I think we should consider critically to what degree we provide anything really new or structurally changing to the table. Why do we expect the same solutions to work this time if the last 30 years have been leading up to a global catastrophe? So this is where I think we kind of start the conversation. So my approach within, for example, Extinction Rebellion has been that firstly, we must stop with the directly destructive activities of, for example, the fossil fuel industry. And then when we have kind of a situation which is not an emergency, a climate emergency, then we can start a democratic conversation and transformation towards a more just and sustainable society. But at the moment, under the slogan of sustainable economic growth, we've been going only in the wrong direction for years and years. And I think without a clear stopping a use of the emergency brake as a metaphor, stopping the business as usual in the way, for example, the COVID crisis did, without such a clear break with the destructive continuous growth society, we can't really see a sustainable future. So this is where I kind of come, I think, where the social movements and the mobilizations come into the picture. That is the goal of all the school strikers and the people involved in blocking fossil fuel infrastructure around Europe and the world. And I think there's a growing movement and a great sense of that this is a historical change. We are not only changing the ways we buy things or consume, but we're changing the whole idea of what it means to be a human being and live fulfilling, rich lives. What is it to be rich? And what does it mean to say that the Nordic model has provided welfare? Is this welfare only material goods, or is there something even greater values we have brought to the world, such as peace and justice?
Thank you, Amos. And actually, Aldis and Henrietta, I have seen that you wanted to say something. Aldis first.
Yes, I wanted to continue a little bit on the structural change that Emma talked about that is needed. And I wanted to point out in that relation that climate crisis is not a single issue. It has to be embedded in all fields of policy and decision making. And if we only focus on climate crisis in areas strictly connected to climate change or environment, then we're in a problem, because this has to be embedded in all fields. And there, I think the private sector, of course, comes in very strongly. And a little bit about young people participating. I mean, we see that this movement is led by young people. And now I'm not sure why states or governments have not handled this as the emergency situation as it is. Some have said that it might be because those in power will not face the consequences of the climate crisis. Therefore, I think it is essential that we not only activate young people to participate, for example, in politics, that can be done through multiple platforms such as activism and also traditional politics, but also that those in power now make space for young people now. And you mentioned in the intro that we as influencers in this panel might be leading in 10 to 15 years. And I ask, why not now?
No,
why
I agree with you.
Now?
Please, that's why you're here. I really hope that it's not in 10, 15 years, but earlier. But it's very important that your voices are heard. And I want to get back to this issue about how you influence the politics today. But first, Henrietta and then Markus.
Yeah, thank you. I'm at the risk of not being contributing very tense debater because I very much agree with the other panelists, and I think there's at the end of the day something rotten in calling to Nordic solutions when we largely, as Emma said, have outsourced a lot of our unsustainable practices, and it's very easy to be boastful. And I think looking to emerging from this COVID crisis and looking ahead to the most important COP since the Paris Agreement, when countries are arriving to the international world stage to recommit to long-term climate targets, we are looking at a huge funding problem, and the research team that I'm a part of tracks the responses to COVID of the world's largest 50 economies, which includes 4 Nordic countries. And at the end of the day, there's a bit of a lip service warning here. And I looked at some of our data this morning, and Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Denmark have together contributed $5 billion to the aviation industry and $0.7 billion to any solution that we can call green. And so I am convinced that this junction of 2 crises could pose a very important window of opportunity for us to help push the world onto a more sustainable trajectory. But we do need to make sure that we hold each other accountable in that process. And I think the success and the resources and the big public mandate for politicians to take climate action gives us a very good opportunity to be that player in the world. Reaching our net zero targets is very much achievable, and according to the International Energy Agency estimates, not only a utopia, but actually achievable using mature and available technologies. And what's missing is the scale and the pace. And as the world gets to the scale and the pace, someone will need to remember to look at who's left behind and who's included. And I think that that's a very proud legacy that we have in the Nordics, to make sure that people are included. And as Emma said, to think of the collective and to make sure that this is a journey that we do together. And entering the international stage in years' time, that's where I see the Nordic countries placing themselves. But I don't think we're there yet.
Thank you, Henrietta. And Marcus.
Yeah, so Storebrand was one of the founding members of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, which now consists of I think around 30 investors representing around $5 trillion in asset under management. And kind of the whole idea there is setting kind of the clear targets of the long term. So where are we going to be in 2050? So it's climate neutral by the latest and aligned with the 1.5 degree scenario. But also a very important part is what happens now in the next 5 years. What happens in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? So I've been co-leading the work on sector targets within our kind of target setting protocol, where we've been looking at the highest emitting sectors. So what is actually needed for the oil and gas industry? What is needed for the aviation industry, for the shipping industry and chemical, steel, etc.? What is needed for them in the next 5 years? What is possible in the next 5 years, and what type of investments will have to be able to ensure that you're on the right path? And I think that's also a very important point in both politics, but also in businesses, having these clear targets. So it's fine to say that we're setting these climate neutral targets far ahead when it comes to the politics, but what are we saying in the next 5 years? So one suggestion could be to have very clear binding targets for where we need to be, to both give predictability to the private sector, but also to give a clear direction on this is where we need to be. So I think that's a very important part. And then
could I ask you one thing about these targets? Do you think that they should be settled on a Nordic level or nation by nation, or how do you see it?
So I think, I mean, in collaboration, I think these targets should be set. I think if we're working in the same direction, we have the same goals. And these days have been throwing out a lot of years. So we're supposed to be climate neutral by 2035, 2040, 2050. But for a lot of, at least for a lot of private sector companies, I think it's hard to understand how exactly are they going to get to net zero? What is the concrete plan to get us there? So I think kind of having a target that is achievable, but also is in line with the 1.5 degree scenario, I think is very important. But your question now, as I hear, is kind of if the Nordic region should have the same target. And yes, I think they should be working together on setting a clear target and also figuring out how they're going to get there. And also one thing I wanted to pull up in this dialogue, it's probably not the most sexy topic, but that's related to reporting. So as investors, it's very important for us to have good and solid information on the companies we want to invest in. How are they going to tackle the future? What opportunities do they see, and what type of emissions actually do they have? So I think one area where the Nordic region really could lead, and also kind of lead together with the EU, is getting up the requirements for reporting. That could both be on reporting on climate risks and opportunities through the TCFD framework, so it's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Basically a framework where you explain both how are you governancing, how are you working with the climate topics, how is your strategy taking into to account the changes that's going to happen, how are you doing that in your risk management, and then in the end, how are you setting concrete metrics and targets to ensure that you are aligned. So I think the Nordic region, I know both Sweden and Denmark have become supporters of the TCFD initiative, but what if the Nordic region went together and said, okay, we're going to be the first region in the world that's actually going to push this agenda. I'm going to say this is going to be a requirement, and we're also going to work together to figure out how do we actually manage to work on this topic, both when it comes to how do we report on our emissions, how do we set concrete targets aligned with the 1.5 degree scenario, and how do we report on that and ensure that risk and opportunity side is integrated into the business strategies and into the metrics and targets of all the companies in the Nordics. If you have kind of that starting point, you have all companies actually being required to report on this, report on their progress, and set clear targets. I think that would be kind of a huge way of at least pushing them in the right direction. And you see several of the private sectors, they're ahead of the curve when it comes to this. So I'm working together with my CEO on something called the Nordic CEOs for a Sustainable Future. And in that group, we've all committed to integrating the recommendations from the TCFD. And we're also asking the government. So we've been presenting to the Nordic ministers, to both the Norwegian and Icelandic minister now before summer. We urge them to actually bring in the TCFD reporting into the requirements, into the legal reporting that the countries have to do, because most likely this is going to be coming through the EU in a few years. So why can't we take a clear leadership here and show the direction?
Yeah. Emma, did you have a comment here?
Yeah, it was just I just wanted to supplement this issue of how this hits, because I think one of the issues with climate change is that it's very abstract. It's an extremely large issue, and it's very difficult to get a grasp of what is it that this actually means. So I've been talking so far about, and also some of the others have been talking about, the way that emissions are unequal, that the way we're emitting is unequal. But obviously, this is also extremely unequal in the way that it hits. And I think there was obviously, we've already seen how people in places in the global south have been heating very rapidly. According to UN Women, 80% of the people who will be displaced by global warming are women, because women are much less mobile because they have children. But there's really a story from 2018 that brought into relief for me what it is that we're dealing with. And there's this small city in California called Paradise, which during the forest fires in California completely burned to the ground. There was nothing left. And then it came out that there had been a forest fire warning for this city for a long time. People knew that it was in a total danger zone for forest fires. So why were people living there? Because it was cheap. Because it's obviously cheap to live somewhere that people know is extremely dangerous to live. And I think we're going to be seeing much more of this, where there'll be two classes of people in society: those who can afford to not be hit by climate change, and those who have to live in risky areas with risks of drought, risks of flooding, risks of fire, risks of tornadoes, et cetera, et cetera. We've already seen how in New Orleans and Indonesia, the real estate that's high up, so that the risk of flooding is lower, is much more expensive than real estate that is low down. So I think we're also going to see climate classes in society, that some people will be dealing with it and some people won't. So I think it's just really to drive home this way that we won't all be experiencing this equally. It won't be like, okay, so now everyone's hit by climate change. Just as with Corona, we've also seen how poor people have been more likely to lose their jobs, that these things, these big crises, even though we all share them, they really hit unequally. So I think sometimes you can sit here in Denmark and say, oh, wow, climate change is not that bad. But that's because we're living in an incredibly privileged part of the world. And I really think that that's very important to remember, because not being hit by it personally can take away some of the urgency of doing something. But I can assure you right now, people are being hit in an extremely real and actual way by this, and they can't afford to do anything about it. So I think this economic aspect of consequences is super, super important. Also, from a Nordic perspective, when we're talking about equality, climate crisis increases inequalities in the world, both internally in countries, but also on a global scale. And I really think we need to keep sight of that when we're looking at, how is it going right now?
Okay, Aldis, you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to shortly add that I very much agree with what Emma said, and I want to add that those who will suffer most from climate crisis are those who are least responsible for the climate crisis. And I think that we should really think about that, and also the inequality that the climate crisis will result in. And that maybe is even more a reason to hold states or governments more accountable. And we should have some mechanisms and legal frameworks that put that in place, that hold them accountable. And that could be with some kind of reporting, like already mentioned here. But I think that this should be binding to actually force states to commit to this problem.
Okay, let me now go back to what you, Aldis, said earlier about being, oh no, my papers are flying away. Thank you. Be active politically in this area. Many of you are very, very active, but you're not active in traditional political parties, at least not all of you. And for this reason, Emma, I shortly already asked you how much you're being heard, how much people are listening to you, those who are in power now, those who make the decisions now. And I'd like to ask the other ones here the same question. Do you feel that you are being heard and listened to by those that are responsible at the moment, or should you find other channels for your activism? Amos, I think I'll start with you.
Great question. I mean, maybe what I wanted to highlight with the example of contrasting the 1992 Seven Suzuki's talk in the Earth Summit with Greta Thunberg is that, yes, the young people have been given a microphone and a place to speak and have been heard quite often and actively, but there's some, but well, the concrete action on climate change has been not at all comparable to the amount of kind of listening done. So yes, this of course frustrates people in the climate movement, but I see that there is no kind of clear alternative to listening and participating in the summits and demonstrating on the streets and, for example, in my case, taking part in civil disobedience, or as there's a hunger strike going on regarding the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy in the EU, right here close to us in Helsinki as well. So there's a lot of methods, and I see a complementarity between these. So I think it's important to have young people heard, as in the case of this meeting here today as well. But it's important to see in what role they are heard, or we are heard. As a quite young person, I can see that is it only to legitimize the policies made or the decisions made by decision makers, so to say, or do we have any substantial power in relation to these decision makers. And I think it's only through organization and a strong sense of citizenry and involvement to society that we can reach democratically some solutions to the climate crisis. So until now, I think it has not involved people enough, and many people feel that they have not had their voice heard, as is the case with the farmers, for example, and this CAP reform going on at the moment in the European Parliament.
Markus, you waved.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. So I can maybe put it into 2 different buckets. So on the one side, it's within my own company. So I think some of the really important things for me and my organization is that I both have my CEO on board and also the board of directors and the executive management team. And I think the important part there is that they actually see the opportunities of thinking sustainable, of finding good solutions, because they actually see that there is also, while also doing what's right for the world, you can also make money. So I think kind of being able to understand that it's not a trade-off between doing good and also doing good financially has been important, and that's both through us as an organization committing to becoming net zero by at least 2050, and also now a few weeks ago when we launched our new procurement strategy, where we've said that okay, by 2025 our goal is that all our suppliers should be climate neutral and really start reporting on both climate but also on diversity topics, on strategy topics, etc. And also I would say in the more of the global or the Nordic sphere, I've also definitely feel that I've been heard, even though I'm young. So either that's through working with the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, where I've been co-leading the sector target working group and actually being a part of setting one of the standards for what is reporting within and target setting within these sectors going to look like in the next years. Also within the Nordic CEOs for Sustainable Future, and through Shift, which is a Norwegian group where I've been able to co-lead the climate tracks. And for example, now I think it was last week, 37 or around there of the largest kind of climate leaders in Norway, they committed to reporting in accordance with the TCFD, so climate risks and opportunities. They committed to setting targets aligned with the 1.5 degree scenario, and they also committed to reporting on their emissions. So I think kind of the voice that I've had has been kind of really heard. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we've also been able to kind of see the opportunities and see where this actually makes sense, and where we can, both as an individual company, but also as a region and as the world, can actually push in the right direction and also make business sense. So I absolutely feel that at least I've been heard both internally and externally.
That's a good thing, and I wish I could add that we had the time to ask you the other ones here the same thing, but now we don't, because it is time for us to hear what our audience has to say. And we have a first question here from Copenhagen. You are by the mic, please.
Yes. Hi. First, I want to say I come from Greenland. I'm really interested about this debate. And in the first debate, I didn't see like any Greenlandic participants. And I want to ask you, like, how much do you have any connection with like kind of organization about climate change in Greenland? Have you heard about it? Because even I come from Greenland, like I don't really know about what we can do something about climate change until I left my country to study in the world.
So this is about the Greenland. Is somebody prepared to answer? Emma?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I think the way that people in Greenland, but also indigenous peoples all over the world, are being hit by climate change is extreme. Like they are some of the groups of people who are being hit worse than anybody. Just 3 weeks ago at Oxfam Ibis, we did a whole series of events with 2 indigenous activists, Taili Terena from Brazil and Aga Hansen from Greenland. And what they described, like it's a two-sided thing, because what I think you can say, and what we do say in Oxfam IBIS, is that indigenous peoples are the protectors of nature. Indigenous peoples have a completely different relationship with nature that is not exploitative, that is built on sustainable ways of living with nature and using nature's resources in a sustainable way. And the way that if you look at a place like Brazil, but also Greenland, what we've seen is that industry has really taken in on indigenous people's lands, right? And indigenous peoples are facing intense discrimination wherever they are. And what Tyler and Aga were both describing was that in non-indigenous societies, we not only need to have more respect for indigenous peoples as individuals, but there's also a lot to learn from the way that indigenous peoples have been living in how we approach the issue of climate change. Because I think they said, and I agree, that we completely need to change our relationship with nature. In Danish culture, for example, we have this idea that human beings and nature are two different things. Whereas Aga said, no, we are nature. So I think if you look at a place like Greenland, it's most definitely a thing that Greenland has been seen as a resource for Denmark, right? There are military bases in Greenland. A lot of, Chinese people, Chinese businessmen, American businessmen are hugely interested in resources that are in Greenland. But are we listening enough to the indigenous peoples and to the Inuit who live in Greenland, whether they want to give their land up? And I don't think we are. So actually in Oxfam, we work a lot on indigenous people's rights, and I do think that there is a huge connection between indigenous people's rights and the fight for the climate, because it's about changing what we value in society. Do we value nature and human life, or do we value, as Amos said, growth at every cost? And I think when we look at how we've treated indigenous peoples historically in this world, especially privileged white people in the global north, we're seeing an example of how we have treated nature. So I think a valid critique that there are no Inuit people here. I think you should really consider that and why that is, because I think the Inuit voices are incredibly important in the Nordic region to understanding what the consequences of climate changes is, because Greenland is one of the places that are hit incredibly violently by this.
We have one more question here. Could you please just come in front here and ask your question, but make it quite short because we are running out of time.
My question is concerning the emission happening in the permafrost in Russia. What can we do to help contain this emission happening?
The climate crisis in Russia. Does someone have an answer to that? What could we do to contain the climate situation in Russia? That was the question.
The permafrost specifically, right?
Yeah. Does any one of you want to answer? Because otherwise, I'll let Emma answer this.
I'm not an expert in the permafrost.
No, we don't have any experts here.
But I think the issue
shortly, if you have, because then we need to go to Helsinki as well. But if you have an answer.
But maybe the question was about containing CO2, right? What do we do about emissions containing? I'm guessing that someone who's more of an expert in climate change.
I see no one that looks very keen on answering this. I'm sorry, we didn't have experts on permafrost here this time, but we'll look for someone to the next time we do a climate summit. But now I'm going to move over to Helsinki to see if we have some questions in Helsinki.
Yes, we do. Hello, so my question would be that the earlier panel talked a lot about the need for vision for a carbon zero society. And then this panel has talked about or underlined the need for a structural change. But at the same time, there's been a lot of talk about the inclusive Nordic model that largely still relies on economic growth as the basis for the welfare state. So my question would therefore be, how do you see that the Nordic countries being able to manage the structural change without it affecting the societal equality? A really easy question. There you go.
Okay, an easy question. Who wants to answer it? Now you cannot look as though you don't have an answer for this one. Aldis, please.
I actually didn't raise my hand, but I think this question is really complex. If I understood it correctly, it was how to make structural change, ensuring equality. And I think it's going to be a very cheap answer, but I think it's important to include various people in the conversation and the discussion when we decide on the structural change. And I think that was a very good point about Greenland, and that is it's a wake-up call that we need to include various people, and not only stakeholders, but also people from various groups. And I think that is one way to ensure equality in structural changes, and really listen to those different voices.
And Henrietta, very shortly.
Very shortly, I just wanted to say that I don't think it's traded off at all. If anything, maintaining and sustaining a welfare state will build on being able to invest in structural change. It's the short term versus the long term. And short term, yes, we are talking mass investments. Long term, we are talking prosperity for future generations. And that, if anything, I think is real welfare.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have one comment from our online audience saying, in reality, all this will be a task for engineers and infrastructure planners. What role could politicians possibly play in this? Talks doesn't solve anything. And that's not a question, but a commentary, and we have to take that to our hearts, I think, because our time is now running totally out. So I would like to thank you very much. And please stay put here, because we are not completely finished here. We have two more people here. I don't know actually where they are. We have Bikka Ulin and Caroline Fausganger-Anders. And Bikka Ulin should be in Helsinki, and Caroline should be in Oslo. They have been listening now for 2 hours to our discussions. And what we ask them to do is to listen and to comment on what they think that could be taken away from what they've heard and taken to COP26, for example, or to politicians for that matter. Please, Bikka, I think you could start over there in Helsinki.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such an interesting discussion today, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I tried to gather my thoughts somehow, but we've tackled quite a lot of topics, so I'll pinpoint the most important things and highlights a bit where I think we should go from here. I think from the first panel, what really struck me was I do understand why we want to keep the tone positive and somehow speak through hope and through new innovations and solutions and sustainable funding, sustainable research and so on. But at the same time, it worries me quite a lot that we want to keep the tone so positive when we're talking about a crisis, because usually when there's a crisis in the world, whether it's a war or a conflict or a pandemic, we are quite serious and we're not afraid to say that we need drastic solutions. But somehow surrounding climate change, we want to be very careful to pinpoint the urgency and perhaps rather talk about all the fun options, because of course this will bring also new solutions that will bring new jobs and new ways of seeing and living our lives, both here in the Nordic and the rest of the world. But not everything will be fun, and there will be some sacrifices made, especially for those of us who are somehow in the most privileged parts of the world and in the most privileged classes in society. So I think we definitely need to also be more brave in the sense that we need to actually say not only those goals that have been quite easily still to identify, but really how will we get there, which cuts will we need to make, which industries will need to change drastically, and also which jobs will not exist and which industries will look very, very different, and how do we make sure that that's a just transition, of course, but still these are not necessarily easy solutions. And I think another group that we don't need to necessarily spend too much time debating is climate deniers. I think they are still somehow a minority. And the big group that I would focus on is definitely those people who have been with us saying that climate change exists and we need to do something, and perhaps even stating those goals, but that are now backing, especially in politics, because of being afraid of making those hard decisions and really making actions when it comes to industries that have also big lobbyists and big supporters in the public debate. And then if there's something that I would tell the private sector, which definitely has a big role and will have a big role going forward, is that not only do we need to innovate and find the technological solutions, we have quite a lot of technological solutions already, the absolute vast majority that we need, but we also need to make sure that big multinationals and global companies that are spending money on influencing policymaking are spending that money to influence sustainable policies and not necessarily to defend fossil fuels and other industries that are actually having a really bad impact right now. And my last point that I want to really pinpoint is the absence of some groups from this discussion as well, which is unfortunately not very surprising. There was already mentioned the indigenous people of Greenland, but also Sami people are missing from this debate. And I hope next time that we meet that we will have also these groups included at the table. Thank you.
We'll try to improve, I promise you. Caroline, are you in? Yes, I can see that you are there. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I like to say I enjoyed both of the previous debates. For me, I think we need to go more back to the basics. And I think that in order for the Nordic countries to become true leaders on climate change, the populations within those countries need to actually believe in the government and in the strategies that are being implemented. And in order for us to do that, the Nordics must take their commitments seriously, including the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement. And at this time, only Norway has improved the Paris Agreement goals, and Finland, Sweden, and Denmark are the only Nordic countries that have actually created national action plans for the 2030 agenda. And if we really want to be the world leaders on climate change, we need the populations of our countries to believe that in the strategies and the policies that the governments are creating. And if they believe in it, including the private sectors, the CSOs and everyone, if they believe in it and they believe in the efforts being made, then people will also contribute with changing their own consuming behaviors and making the change that will enhance the change being implemented by the government. And only by doing that, we can say to the world, look to us to see true leadership on climate change.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And now, finally, actually, I'd like to just conclude by hopefully saying what I heard that are the messages that we should take with us from here to COP26. Now, if I'm not right, then you'll have to contact me later because we have no time for discussion here. But I heard you say that we should share our experiences rather than exporting our solutions. We should share our experiences and help others learn from our mistakes. We should focus very much on climate justice and a global responsibility, not think only about ourselves. We should constantly and transparently report on the progress or the lack thereof that is being done when it comes to climate. And we should include indigenous people in this discussion more than we have done so far. I hope that you agree with me. I'm very grateful for this discussion. I want to say thank you to all of you, to Emma, to Amos, to Markus, to Aldis and Henrietta, and to Bikka and Caroline. Thank you very much. And please don't forget that our program continues. We'll take a break now for about 35 minutes. And then we will be looking more closely at the effects the green transition has on the labor market.